Hey everybody. So this week we're actually going to take a different path than the one we've pursued for much of the semester in terms of nights and battles and other things like that, and dig in a little bit more to the idea of love and courtly love. So in some ways we're going back to some of the discussions that we've had, starting out talking about the Miller's Tale before the midterms. So as we're moving forward with this, we're going to look at two groups of sonnets. One by Philip Sidney, who you read last week in the discussion of the defense of poesy, and then Shakespeare, who you know from plays. Both of them are poets. And what's really important is to think about Sidney's idea that works of fiction, right, of poesy, should both teach and delight to prompt virtue. And so, in some ways, we're going to make Sidney put his money where his mouth is and ask, okay, in this study of Astrophil and Stella, what sort of virtue are you putting out there? What ways are you teaching? What ways are you delighting? How is that idea that you put forward about works should be teaching and delighting come to bear in your own poetic work? Now, what Sidney brings to the table and others in this time is the influence of Petrarch in Italy and the Italian Renaissance on a writing form, the sonnets and sonnet sequences, where you have what the form of the octave and sestet, which is the first 8 lines and then the following 6 lines. The first 8 lines present an idea, and then the following 6 lines respond to it. And what you'll see in the Renaissance, and writers like Edmund Spenser and Shakespeare even, as they play with this form a good bit to make it more creative. For example, Shakespeare, at the end of his sonnets, you'll see that he finishes with a rhyming couplet versus other forms that are popular during this time. I think it's a beautiful poetic form, and I think these authors did some really interesting things with it. So I'm excited to see where we go with that. So for Sidney, as we talk about Astrophil and Stella, this is the epitome of the idealized courtly love environment, where you'll hear Astrophil speak in so many extended languages of what he's feeling or how beautiful Stella is. And notice even the language of the names, right? Astrophil, star, lover, and Stella, star. The idea of this kind of being this extended beyond the physical realm of love. But I want to think about, as we talk about this, what sort of virtue is it prompting? You know, Astrophil doesn't get the girl in his way, or doesn't get the object of his affection. She ends up rejecting him. So what do we do with that? Does it mean that all of Astrophil, of what's led up to this, like, is it worth it? What sort of ways are all the pain that he's feeling, what's that doing to him? Is that virtuous? Is Sidney trying to say this is ridiculous? Is he trying to say this is what authentic emotion looks like? Is he trying to make fun of this idea of idealized love? Is he saying this is what we feel? Of course it doesn't make sense. It's love. Love isn't supposed to make sense. There's a number of ways you can go with that. In my opinion, changes on this sonnet sequence, man, all the time. And so it's a really fabulous ideal for looking at that. And then what does it cost? What does this sort of virtue cost? What does this sort of love cost Astrophil? Is he punished for his love of Stella, for his refusing of what should be his logical thoughts? Or is he better for having experienced what he's experienced? You know, to have loved and lost rather than to have never loved at all. So dig into that, think about those ideas. And as we move into Shakespeare, Shakespeare takes a different approach to this. So the first big bulk of those sonnets are not written to a woman. They're written to a beautiful young man. And people have, throughout literary history and more recently, interpreted this as asking the question, is Shakespeare homosexual? I don't know that there's a conclusive thought, neither do the scholars. They tend to go back and forth in this similar idea. So we want to dig into love as not necessarily defined as affection, but love as what it's supposed to be doing. And then much of what he discusses with the beautiful young man is time. Shakespeare in his sonnets is aware of time constantly encroaching upon him, that the world is changing. One of the ways that I put, one of the words that I put up on this board at the beginning of the semester was this idea of mutability, that things are changing, right? We see mutability in The Wanderer, right? The Old English poem we read, that life that I used to have, it was good. Now life is not good. Things have changed and things continue to change. He finds hope in that. We see Beowulf get older, right? That idea of things are always moving down this path of change and that time is ever encroaching. And what does time take away? Well, time takes away our beauty, right? Now, there are beautiful ways to grow old, but the encroachment of time is that we are always, at some point, going to die. And that time is coming. And at this age, I'm 38 years old. My body doesn't work the way that it used to when I was 28 years old. And that's going to be continuing to happen. I know that every old person says that, but the idea there is that time is encroaching. And so what does Shakespeare say about how to fight against the ravages of time? Well, he talks about it in two different ways. One, have kids, right? Keep the line going. That's one of the purposes that marriage serves in these sonnets. Is he's saying to the beautiful young man, you need to have children so that you can keep your beauty going. And the other way is through poetry. And he's right in some degree, because we're still reading these poems 400 years later. But there are some questions that we might ask about that across the board. Is he right? Is that true? Does it continue to keep these things going? I mean, Shakespeare in a lot of ways is mysterious. We don't know who the beautiful young man is. Is he saying this as an idealized way that Astrophil might? Or is he talking about in reality that poetry can keep these ideas going even if the people go away? So, and then finally, as we get into the Dark Lady sonnets at the end of the sonnets, Shakespeare's sonnets, you're going to see a very different form of love than the idealized love at the end of, really throughout Astrophil and Stella. Is Shakespeare is harsh, to be honest. And again, Shakespeare is not necessarily the speaker here. He's not referring to his wife or to another person necessarily. He might be. But there is this sense of, if you read Sonnet 130, which you're probably familiar with, it's my mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. And he kind of rolls off how his mistress, the lady he's referring to, is not anywhere what we would describe the same way that Astrophil describes Stella. But he says that my love is richer beyond compare. So is it more authentic? Is he saying, look, all of this expressed love poetry, it's not real. But the love that he has with this person is real, even though it doesn't, we're not going to say that she has the stars in her eyes or something like that. So it's a fascinating group of texts to kind of dig into, to seek to understand, to unpack these major themes, and to just see how you want to write about them, see how you want to explore these different ideas, especially all under the guise of, do they teach, do they delight, how? And you might even call Sidney to question. You might even say, this is what poetry's supposed to be doing, this doesn't do it, and explain why. And so as you're moving forward with that, especially with poetic works, and it's certainly true with prose works, but with poetry, you need to quote the line. Let the words speak for themselves. These authors put in a bunch of time to make sure that each word, each syllable, each letter does what it's supposed to do. So let the lines speak for themselves and then explain those lines. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.